Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Let's get the latest from the United Nations on New York, where the UK's representative, Sir Am Incorrigible, has been speaking on the situation in Jerusalem.
Briefing, in particular for your unequivocal support for the two-state solution and for your warnings against unilateral measures that jeopardize the prospect of a sustainable peace for Israelis and Palestinians. From the outset, I would like to make clear that the United Kingdom's position on the status of Jerusalem is clear and long-standing. It should be determined through a negotiated settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and Jerusalem should ultimately be the shared capital of the Israeli and Palestinian states. In line with relevant Security Council resolutions, including 242, 478, and 2334, we regard East Jerusalem as part of the occupied Palestinian territories. We therefore disagree with the US decision to move its embassy to Jerusalem and unilaterally to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel before a final status agreement. These decisions are unhelpful to the prospects for peace in the region, an aim that I know all of us in this council remain committed to. The British embassy to Israel is based in Tel Aviv, and we have no plans to move it. Mr. President, we share President Trump's desire to bring an end to this conflict. We welcome his commitment to a two-state solution negotiated between the parties. We note his clear acknowledgement of the importance of the final status of Jerusalem, including the sovereign boundaries within the city, which must be subject to negotiations between the parties. We remain committed to an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement that is based on 1967 borders, with agreed and equal land swaps, reflecting both parties' national and religious interests, and with Jerusalem as the shared capital of an Israeli and Palestinian state. This outcome must be determined through a final status agreement and a just, fair, agreed, and realistic settlement for refugees that is demographically compatible with the principle of two states for two peoples. Mr. President, we recognize that Jerusalem holds huge significance and holiness for Jews, Muslims, and Christians. We reiterate the fundamental necessity of maintaining the status quo at the holy sites, in particular the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif, and we welcome President Trump's call on the parties to maintain that status quo. Access and religious rights of both peoples must be respected. We value Jordan's important role as custodian of the holy sites and remain fully supportive of their efforts to maintain calm.
A senior UN official says there is a serious risk of escalating violence across the Middle East following President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. At least one man has died and hundreds have been injured following clashes between Israeli police and Palestinians. Well, let's talk more about this with Chris Doyle, Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. He is live in our central London studio. Many thanks indeed for joining us. Just listen to Matthew Rycroft, the UN representative to the United Nations, reiterating the UK's commitment to a two-state solution. Can that be achieved now we've had President Trump's decision of making Jerusalem Israel's capital?
It certainly can in theory, but it has not helped that the President of the United States has done this. He's kicked off a firestorm that he may not be able to put out. And it's incredible, really, because there's been an international consensus that now key members of the international community are desperately trying to reimpose that they do not recognize sovereignty over any part of the city of Jerusalem, that they see that the eastern part is under belligerent occupation, and that it should be, its future status should be determined through negotiations. Well, Donald Trump has undermined that. And he has also undermined the United States' standing in the region, its ability to act as an impartial broker, and also key alliances. The King of Saudi Arabia has gone on record with his criticism. That shocked some people. Mike Pence, the US Vice President, is traveling out to the region. It's not clear who's willing to see him. Today we learned that the Imam of the Al-Azhar, the very, very important and significant Islamic institution in Cairo that is at the heart of Sunni Islam, he won't see him. And it really is actually a sign of what may come, not just on the issue of Israel-Palestine, but on other conflicts as well, where European states and other powers are going to have to act as the firefighters to deal with some of the issues that Donald Trump stirs up, because he is not prepared, as we know and as we have seen, to act with this sort of usual diplomacy that some would like to see from an American president.
So what do you think could come? Because there have been reports of potential escalating violence in the region as a result.
Well, this is what happens when you stir things up in perhaps the most contested, most divided city anywhere. This piece of real estate is sacred to so many people. It arouses huge emotions. So certainly diplomats and others are going to have to work very, very hard to calm things down, that there are obviously going to have to be some promises to all parties and reassurances made. But quite frankly, when you have a captive population under occupation, as Palestinians are in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem, they see that negotiations aren't going to get them anywhere. There haven't been any negotiations for years. Even when they happened, they didn't deliver rights for Palestinians. They didn't deliver national aspirations or their freedom. So there's very little confidence that they can go forward.
Crystal, many thanks indeed. Thanks for your expertise.
There have been clashes between Israeli forces and Palestinians, protesting at Donald Trump's decision to recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital. One person has died, over 200 have been injured. There have also been demonstrations across the Arab world. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Byrne, reports from Jerusalem.
The biggest protests were in Gaza. Plenty of people have warned that US recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital would lead to bloodshed. The first person to die was a 30-year-old Palestinian, Mahmoud al-Masri. He was shot by the Israeli army during clashes on Gaza's border. Others were wounded. There were clashes around towns on the West Bank too. The Palestinians want Gaza and the West Bank to be their future state, with a capital in East Jerusalem.
This is our land. Palestinian, all Palestinian is our land. Mr. Trump, you are wrong.
Israelis who want all of Jerusalem are delighted by President Trump's recognition of their capital. He said, "We're steadfast here, eternally here since ancient times. This city was given to Jews 3,000 years ago. We're the continuation, and the US has recognized that." But the Golden Dome behind him is part of the third holiest place in the world for Muslims. And a few hundred yards away, several thousand Palestinians were going home after the noon prayer. The reality of this city is that many Palestinians live here. Life for them can be hard. Saleh Shweiki's home has been demolished twice this year by order of the Israeli authorities. Like many Palestinians, he built without a permit. Israel gives Palestinians very few construction permits while building thousands of homes for Jews.
I born in this land, and my father and my grandfather, and I will died in this place.
Palestinian areas of Jerusalem were quieter after Friday prayers than many expected. Whenever a crowd formed, mostly of onlookers rather than protesters, the police broke it up.
Mr. Trump's declaration is a big challenge for the Palestinian national movement. It'll turn into a big defeat for it as well if the Palestinians aren't able to organize a coherent challenge to what's happened and to build on all the international criticism there's been.
Israel feels on the up. It's been given American presidential recognition in this city without mention of occupation and without, so far, a single concession in return. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, to other news now, and following Friday prayers, Muslims around the world came out in protest today in response to President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. One Palestinian man was killed and many others injured in clashes with Israeli security forces in Gaza. But despite calls for a day of rage, protests across Jerusalem, Gaza and the West Bank were relatively peaceful. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, has the latest.
It's their mosque, they say. Not the Israelis, not Donald Trump's, a Muslim holy place on Palestinian land. Today's demonstrations in Jerusalem against the US president's decision to recognize the city as the Israeli capital were largely peaceful, despite the presence of Israeli security forces. In the West Bank, youths burnt tires, ritual gestures of defiance, Arab youths with their faces covered, versus Jewish youths in uniform, stones against tear gas. Yet the truth is, while demonstrations might enable young Palestinian men to vent their frustration and fury, they have no impact on Israelis, let alone on President Trump. In Gaza, several Palestinians were injured and at least one was killed after demonstrators threw rocks into Israel and the soldiers responded with live fire. Supporters of the ruling party, Hamas, said they'll keep protesting until Al-Quds, as they call Jerusalem, is liberated. They're fed up of hearing UN Security Council members say the Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem is illegal, but do nothing about it.
Although the US declaration went against the positive decisions on the Palestinian cause, we don't put our hope in the Security Council, but rather in our people, persistence and steadfastness.
In the corridors of not much power at the UN, Security Council members urged the US to be more even-handed, to no avail.
Over many years, the United Nations has outrageously been of the world's foremost centers of hostility towards Israel. The UN has done much more damage to the prospects for Middle East peace than to advance them. We will not be a party to that. Israel will never be, and should never be, bullied into an agreement by the United Nations or by any collection of countries that have proven their disregard for Israel's security.
Across the world, Muslims, for whom Jerusalem is their third holiest site, demonstrated after Friday prayers today. Donald Trump's decision offends and outrages them, but he's not listening.